Growing up in California, I would hear my older brother and his friends talking about these abandoned towns that were scattered throughout the desert. They would always go exploring in abandoned buildings and towns, and when they would tell me their stories, it would always sound so cool. This is why my family wasn't too surprised that as soon as my friends and I could drive, we began doing the exact same thing. For the most part, we would visit places that my brother had told us about, but there were a few occasions where we would see something online and decided to be the first ones to check it out. For the most part, this led to some pretty cool stories to share when we would all hang out on the beach. But there was one occasion that always haunted me and my two buddies, Dylan and Mateo. The three of us had heard of this ghost town that was out in the middle of nowhere in the desert, and we thought it would be a great place to visit for the day and go exploring. And when a weekend came up that all of us were available, we packed our cameras and began our trip. The drive took about 3 hours, and the last hour of it was particularly barren. There were almost no signs of life outside of the occasional gas station and rest areas. Finally, we made it to the town, and immediately you could tell it had been abandoned for years. Most of the houses were single-story homes, with most, if not all, of the windows smashed out, and a lot of them even had their roofs caving in on them. We spent the first hour or so just walking along the road and peeking into the houses from the outside. Most of them were locked, so we didn't want to break in. However, there was one building that caught our eye. At the end of one of the tiny side roads leading off of the town, we noticed there was one house that had tarps covering up broken parts of the roof. Out of curiosity, we approached. It almost looked like someone had turned it into a makeshift home. I think that was when we all got a little freaked out, as we all simultaneously realized that we might not actually be alone in this supposedly abandoned town in the middle of nowhere. Mateo calmed Dylan and me down, and we all collectively figured that maybe someone was squatting there. But the odds of them still living there seemed small, so we slowly approached it to check out what might have been left behind. As I approached the window, I made sure to listen closely for the sound of anyone moving around inside, but from what I could tell, it was vacant. I pressed my face against the glass, and through the fog created every time I exhaled, I could see all of the torn and tattered furniture that sat alongside a heap of trash left behind by whoever had been staying there. I signaled to Dylan and Mateo to come to check it out, but just as they got to the window, I noticed something that told me we had been wrong. Sitting on a small end table beside the couch was a handgun of sorts, and I could tell even from that distance that it was the cleanest thing in the house, meaning someone was inside. That was when we all heard the sound of vehicles approaching. We couldn't tell what kind, but it sounded like dirt bikes or maybe ATVs. Dylan and Mateo turned to see where the sound was coming from, and before I could join them, we all heard a yell come from inside of the house. A man had come around the corner into the room and was standing directly across from the window. His yell caused all of us to jump, and we began running away as fast as we could. We ducked through the yards that connected the abandoned house and did our best to stay out of sight as the sound of vehicles got closer and eventually passed us in the direction of the house where we were running from. We all made it back to the car, which was parked about a half a mile down the road. As we began to turn around, we could hear something that truly terrified us. Those vehicles were back, and it sounded like they were heading our way. Mateo quickly turned the car around, and we headed home as quickly as we could. When I walked inside my house, I was relieved to see my brother so I could tell him what had happened to us. That was when he told us that he had heard of the ghost town we visited, and they never went there because it used to be a known drug den. The police had apparently busted multiple meth labs in those houses over the past decade. A group of friends and I had always wanted to go camping in the Nevada desert, so when we all finally got the opportunity to do so, we all jumped at it. It was a 3-day camping trip, and we made sure that we had more than enough supplies to deal with the extremely hot days and cold evenings. The first night was indescribable. I mean, they always say that the sky over the desert at night is something of wonder, but I had never seen that many stars in my life. We spent most of the next day walking around. We went on a decent hike that lasted about 2 hours before returning to camp and getting our food going. From that point on, we just read our books and enjoyed some music that we played through a battery-powered speaker that we brought with us. As the sun fell in the sky, we welcomed what we expected to be another beautiful night, but we were sadly mistaken. We all sat beside the fire as we let it get smaller so we could see the stars better. When my friend Francis began to tap me on the shoulder, I asked him what he needed, and instead of telling me, he just pointed off in the distance. Now we were miles away from any civilization, so you can imagine how surprised we were to see what appeared to be another person standing about 20 feet away from our camp, just staring in our direction. We got everyone else's attention, and by the time they were all looking, the figure began to walk closer to us. That's when I decided it might be best to call out to them, so I yelled hello and asked if we could help them with something. They didn't respond at all. They just kept getting closer. At this point, they were right at the edge of our camp and continued to walk through. We all stood up from our seats and kept asking them if they were okay and if they needed help, but there was no answer. They didn't even look at us as we tried to talk to them. It was a grown man who slowly made his way right through the middle of our camp and then continued walking. That night, we decided to stay up because we weren't sure if they would come back or not. But around 2 a.m, the wind began to kick up and our fire ended up being blown out. If it weren't for the stars in the sky, we would have been in total darkness. We spent the next 2 hours waiting for the sun to come up, and after about 20 minutes of darkness, our worst fears came true. We could see the figure that we saw before lurking around in the distance. We all stayed close to each other, still unsure about what he wanted. There were a few occasions where the man got close to our camp, but he just seemed to be aimlessly walking back and forth. It was terrifying, but he oddly didn't seem to want anything to do with us. As the sun began to rise, we all began to pack up our things. Though nothing happened to us, there was no way we could do another night out there. As we were packing our things, I kept looking out into the distance, wondering if I would see the man who had been stalking us, but there was no sign of him anywhere. We left the area without a trace of us being there, and haven't talked about going back since. When I was 27 years old, I decided I wanted to be adventurous, and one of the things that I always wanted to do was go on the Appalachian Trail hike. So I decided to plot out a 4-day section of the hike and ask my dad if he would drop me off at my starting point and pick me up 4 days later at a spot that I designated on the map and GPS. He was more than happy to help me, and before I knew it, my hike began. Days 1 and 2 were just fine. I was making good pace for a while, and it was actually looking like I might reach my pickup point a day early. That would have been fine though, as I would just camp out and take the day to relax and get a good night's sleep. Halfway through my 3rd day, I couldn't help but feel like I was being followed. I assumed it was just some animal and nothing for me to be too concerned with. But after swearing, I heard shuffling behind me. I stopped and looked over my shoulder. That was when I noticed what looked like a bit of fur poking out from behind a tree. As soon as the animal poked his head out to look in my direction, I could clearly see the head of a mountain lion. He noticed me looking at him and took off running off the trail and into the woods. I was confused and concerned as I never encountered a mountain lion before, and I was essentially in the middle of nowhere. I couldn't stand there for long though, and I decided to keep my pace and continue walking through the trail. Sure enough though, about 5 minutes after I continued walking, I got that feeling again, and I just knew that I was being followed. I decided it might be safer for me to end my trip sooner than later, so I stopped on the trail and quickly pulled out my map. I could feel the two eyes staring at me from beyond the tree somewhere. I just couldn't take the time to find out which one. As soon as I looked at my map, I found the nearest pickup location and called my father. I think he could hear the panic in my voice because he told me to hurry to the parking lot and that he would meet me there. I had a 4-mile run ahead of me, but I did my best to pace myself. I had to take a few small breaks to catch my breath, but as I got closer to my destination, that feeling of being followed slowly faded. By the time I had gotten to the parking lot, I could see my dad's car. I quickly ran to it and explained to him what had happened. We both made our way home and tried to forget about the whole thing, but it's something I still can't quite shake.
To start this story off, I'm 15 years old, but I look a tad bit older. Still, I probably couldn't be mistaken for more than 17 years old. I'm 5'2" and 110 pounds soaking wet. Anyway, the other day I was walking around Walmart, looking for some new room decor and buying some hair dye. I went to the hair dye aisle by myself and ran into an older man. He told me he was looking for some for his granddaughter, but couldn't find the exact color she wanted because he didn't have his reading glasses on. He told me the color he wanted, and I quickly helped him find it. I also asked a few other questions like how long his granddaughter's hair was, how dark it was, just to make sure he got the right amount of dye, and to tell him if he needed to bleach or not, since the dye was a bright Barbie pink. After making sure he had everything he would need, he thanked me and walked over to the next aisle. I got my dye and walked off to go look at some more room decor. When I was in the aisle with the bedding sets, I noticed the man was there as well. I just assumed that maybe his granddaughter's birthday was coming up and he was getting some nice stuff for her, since this was the girls' bedding aisle. I grabbed the set I wanted and went to go take a look at some fake plants. When I got to the aisle, I noticed the man was there too. I turned to smile at him when I realized that he no longer had the hair dye with him, or any bedding. That's about when I started to panic. My phone had died at some point, because it was dead when I got it out to pocket call my brother. At this point, I remembered that my mom had told me if I ever felt like I was in danger at Walmart, to go over to the phone cases. Since they have to keep them locked in a case so you don't steal them, there would always be a worker there to help. When I got to the phone cases, I asked for assistance getting a case from the locked box. When the worker came over to help me, I quickly explained my situation and pointed the man out to him. Me and the worker both realized at this point that the man was sitting down and seemed to be recording or taking pictures of me. The man told me to give him a second before handing me a random case from the box and going into the back room. The other worker pretended like he was having trouble ringing me up. Then I noticed the worker that had gotten me the case come out of the back room in his everyday clothes before circling around the aisles and coming up to me. He very loudly asked me where I'd been. I told him I was just getting a new case, but there seemed to be a problem getting it rung up. He pretended to argue with me before grabbing the case, handing it to the cashier, and telling him we wouldn't be buying it and we were leaving now. The worker walked me all the way back to the self-checkout and waited with me until my brother got there with his stuff. I don't know what the man's intentions were exactly, but I know they weren't any good. I'm very thankful to the Walmart workers who helped me out of what could have been a very dangerous situation. I'm gonna start off this story by saying that at the time this happened, I was a 19-year-old sophomore in college. I was living on campus in their apartment-style dorms, and my college wasn't exactly in the nicest part of the city. I'd usually drive a little bit farther to go grocery shopping, so I could be in a bit more of a safer area. The night this happened, I was going to cook dinner, and realized I didn't have some of the spices I needed. Normally, I would have just said, forget it. and made something else. The meat had already been thawed for a day or so though, so I did need to cook it. I debated just going to the Walmart that was about 2 minutes away from my campus, but it was getting late, and I didn't want to go there by myself in the dark. That Walmart is right next to a major highway, and being a girl by herself, I felt quite uncomfortable risking it. Instead, I went to the Walmart that was about 20 minutes away, a few towns over. I got to that other Walmart and bought my spices, along with a few other things, and checked out no problem. By the time I was done though, it was now completely dark out. I was back at the driver's side of my car, putting my few bags into the passenger seat, when I noticed a woman. She was an African American, maybe in her 50s, and she was looking at the back of my car. At the time, I drove a really old car, and if you knew your cars, you would be surprised that it was still running even. I've had a few people in the past, older men usually, look at it and come up and ask me about my car. I figured that this is what the lady was doing, and I kind of ignored it until out of the corner of my eye, I saw her come around my car and stop about 2 feet behind where I was standing. I was parked next to a parking lot median, so it's not like she was getting in a car next to me or something. Excuse me, she said. I turned around and said, yes, kind of prepared to answer what year or model is your car. My church is giving out leftover boxes of food from our food drive to people in need. Could I perhaps give you one? We have them in our car over there. This immediately set off an alarm in my head. I mean, she had just seen me putting my groceries in my car. Why would I need something else after I just went shopping? Also, churches and food pantries around my college were usually cleaned out after they had their shopping days for people who relied heavily on things like food drives. I'd never heard of there being anything that was just left over. I had watched enough Criminal Minds and read enough Facebook posts to know that something shady was going on here. I stuttered over my words a bit at first, trying to figure out what to say. Finally, I managed to get out a, "Oh, no thank you, I'm good." I'd like to see it go to someone who could actually use it. I felt like that was an okay response if she was really handing out boxes. "Are you sure? They're just right over here in my car," she said, taking a step and making the gap between us just that much smaller. I was panicking. As she stepped closer, I tried nonchalantly to put my hand in my bag and look for the small pocket knife my dad had given me. My mind was racing as I tried to find that knife, but also tried to keep my face calm and not suspicious. I repeated to her that I was good, and the box of food should go to someone who could really use it. She finally seemed to let up though, saying, "Okay, well, have a good night. God bless you," and all that sort of stuff. I told her to have a good night as well. Then, as soon as her back was turned, I got in my car and locked all the doors. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I noticed the car she was walking to had 3 large men standing at the trunk of it. They were barely illuminated by the parking lot lights, but I could see it was an early 2000s white Nissan. As I tried to go down the parking lot aisle as fast as I could, I saw the men looking at my car just like the woman had. I then noticed where their eyes were shifted to. They weren't just staring at my car, they were staring at my license plate. Just as I got to the end of the aisle waiting to turn, I saw 2 of the men get in the front seats, and the other man and the woman get in the back. Their car started, and they started to pull out too. I was having a full-blown panic attack now. Just a week before, my friend had posted something on Facebook about how 2 men had followed her and her mom through a Walmart. Again, I had watched enough crime shows to know that this was not painting a pretty picture. Well, I finally got my opportunity to turn, but that car was coming up behind me. I made the quick decision to take a really odd way back to campus. I made a ton of turns and went through a lot of small streets instead of taking one of the main roads. I don't think I saw the car again after I pulled out of the parking lot, but I was definitely not risking it. By the time I got back to my college, I had calmed down a little bit. I had started to wonder to myself, maybe you're overthinking this. Maybe there actually are just some good people in the world. I decided that maybe they really were giving out boxes of food, and hopefully it went to someone in need. That was until I was walking behind my car headed towards my building. There was an SF faintly written in white sidewalk chalk on the brown paint of my car. I was shocked and terrified, knowing I definitely did not put that there. I said out loud, "Oh my fucking God." I practically dropped my bags on the ground and rushed to wipe the chalk off with the sleeve of my jacket. My car had been tagged. After a few seconds of wiping, the chalk was gone, so I locked my car, grabbed my bags, and raced into my building. I got into my dorm and saw the dinner I was supposed to make, but by now I had lost my appetite completely. I put away everything and went into my bedroom, still reeling over what had happened in the last 45 minutes. I sent the whole story as a Snapchat video to some of my friends, who were just as shocked as I was. My one friend Sarah said she thought the SF might have stood for single female. It made sense, which made the whole experience that much scarier. I called my mom afterward and told her everything that happened. By the end of the call, she was sending me an Amazon package with pepper spray in it. I didn't go out after dark or by myself for about 2 weeks after that happened. I'd have a friend from campus or work go with me, or I just wouldn't go at all. The whole situation was terrifying, but I think the strangest part about it all was that was supposed to have been the safer area. I drove all the way to that Walmart because I had a bad feeling about the one that was closest to me. I started going to the Walmart that was closer to me after that, and I'd never had a negative experience at the closer one since I started going. It's still hard to believe that all that stuff I'd seen on TV and the internet could have almost happened to me too. This is my second posting that happened after the bus incident. I actually bought a car right after that. I had a car loan to pay off, but I was so shook up after that I decided it was worth it. Unfortunately, I'm an idiot and decided one night in the middle of the night that I needed to grab something from Walmart. I don't remember what time it was, and honestly at this point I can't even remember what I went to go get, but I do remember that I was getting out of my car when I saw a rusted car pull up to the front of the building. The larger person in the driver's seat kinda shoved some skinny, disheveled-looking late teen to early 20-year-old out of the car. They were aggressively ordering him to do something, and then drove off in a hurry. I saw the teenager look at me as I closed my door and hurried into the store. I had a kind of do not involve me mentality. I didn't know what they were doing, I just knew I didn't want to be involved. This only lasted a few minutes though. I had immediately gone into the women's clothing section because I wanted to be further away from the entrance when he came in. But gosh dang if that obvious drug addict didn't immediately run up to me. I can be naive, but I'm not completely sheltered. As soon as he opened his mouth, I knew he was going to ask me for money, and money is a pet peeve of mine. I work hard. I made very little money and had to work extremely hard for it. I was lifting boxes of product, assembling furniture, having to take buses with crazy people. Before I had a car, if I missed that bus, I would have to walk miles just to get home. I realized at this point the person who dropped him off had probably ordered him to get money some way or another, and I was really annoyed. I could see him preparing himself to try and look pitiful, and opening his eyes wide to look innocent. I guess he didn't understand how insincere he looked right off the bat. He came over to me. "Ma'am, can I ask you?" "No." I immediately cut him off. I didn't want to hear whatever lie he was about to tell me. He tried a few more times, then got really angry and stalked off, pissed at me. He found the lady working in the changing rooms. I could hear him talking to her in the same insincere tone, complaining about me to gain some sympathy. She cut him off though, and I heard her call out on the radio very loudly, "Security, come and get this crackhead out of here." I heard him pleading with her, and her yelling at him for a minute. Security came to escort him out. It was funny in the moment, and I thought it was over after that. I went about my business and checked out. I was about to step out when I suddenly had a thought. Well, you know, that guy is really mad at me. He knows where I parked, and his ride drove off leaving him there. So that guy was still out there. There were only 4 cars in the parking lot, mine with 2 cars next to it, and one a row after mine. I thought I was overreacting, but I felt like it was a bad idea to go out alone. I stood there for a few minutes contemplating getting security to walk me out when I heard someone getting checked out. I looked over to see it was a very well-built, tall man who seemed nice, so I waited and asked if he could walk me to my car. He was from the car the row after mine. He didn't mind at all, so I walked with him to my car, locked the door, and he walked to his. I really thought I had overreacted. I thought I was being paranoid. Until I pulled out and drove past those two cars next to me to leave, and saw that young guy uncrouch from between the two cars next to mine and run off. I stopped going out alone at night after that, and started keeping my pepper spray in my hands in parking lots if I did. So this happened about 13 years ago. I was 10 at the time, and my brother was 8. We had just moved to a new town that year, and the Walmart here had this sweet arcade up near the service desk. Every time my parents would bring us grocery shopping, they'd each give us a few dollars to let us play in the arcade. The town had an incredibly low crime rate, and the arcade was at the front of the store, where dozens of people were checking out, so what could possibly go wrong? My brother was playing the claw machine, while I was standing to the side trying to help him angle the claw perfectly above a stuffed animal he was trying to get. Quite suddenly, this random hillbilly walked up to the claw machine next to us, inserted a quarter, and began moving the claw around. Most of this time, though, he was making eye contact with my brother and smiling, not even watching the game. He wasn't talking to us, just staring and smiling. He had long, thin brown and silver hair, pulled back in a loose ponytail at the base of his skull, a camo trucker hat, and a long, scraggly beard. I remember vividly the way that he smelled. Stale beer, ashtray, and something that smelled like a sweet yet sour dirt, perhaps? Or maybe a fungus? He tried making small talk with my brother and I, who were raised to be aware of strangers, but still be polite. Eventually, we got bored of the game we were playing, and I ushered my brother to follow me to a new game on the opposite side of the arcade. A few seconds later, that man followed us, stationing himself once again at the claw machine next to us. At some point, an overweight lady walked in and said to the hillbilly, "What are you doing to these little kids?" and snickered at me. He replied, "I'm trying to win them some stuffed animals." She then began playing the claw machine on the other side of us, so that my brother and I were sandwiched between these two strange hillbillies. His comment came across as weird to me, because previously I thought he was maybe trying to win something for his kids. The entire time, though, he'd just been following my brother and I from game to game, trying to win us toys. This had been going on for maybe 20 minutes at this point. They'd followed us to several different machines and spent a lot of money. The games were all 25 cents per play. Each time my brother and I switched machines, they'd follow us over. The hillbilly leans over and says to the lady, "I'm out of money. You got any?" She says, "Nah, I'm broke too." My brother says he has $1 still. Now this is the part that really scared me. I remember listening to these two talk about some weird things with us, asking if I have a boyfriend, asking where we go to school, where our parents work, if we've ever done drugs. But when my brother said he had $1, she responded with the most horrifying thing I'd heard from them yet. The woman suddenly burst out with a, "Well shit, give it to him then, boy." Her face was red. The tone in which she shouted was so ear-piercing and gut-wrenching, I could feel the blood drain from my face. My brother looked like he was about to cry. He handed her the $1, and her face lit up. She laughed it off, almost like she was trying to make it seem like she was joking when she yelled at us. My father walked up to us a couple minutes later. As I turned to tell him that these people had spent close to $15 to win toys for us, they leaved hurriedly, before he got a good look at them. My dad was livid. He took us to the front desk and told them what I told him. They made an announcement on the intercom to keep an eye out for these people, and to report them to an employee if they saw them. Then they called the police. I don't actually remember this part, or much of anything after my father arrived, but this is what he told me. They never did find the couple. The police reviewed security cameras, too blurry to make out any physical details, and told my parents that the couple left the store immediately after my father showed up, without any groceries. Every time I see a man or woman in Walmart that looks as I remember them, I get anxiety and try to avoid them. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here as always. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you guys enjoyed the content in this video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any thoughts about the stories in the video or any things you think I can do to improve the videos themselves, please be sure to leave those in the comments below, as I always read through all the comments and really enjoy it. If you guys have any stories you'd like to submit yourselves, or any stories you'd like to suggest, please take a look in the description below the video. You can find links to my Gmail, Facebook, and Twitter accounts. Send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to read it as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in your own story, please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you would like to be credited in the description of the video the story appears in. Last but not least, if you guys enjoy my narration style and you would like to see more of it, you can go ahead and check out my two alternate channels, Mr. Blue Skies and Darkest Hour. I upload true crime stories at least once a week on Mr. Blue Skies, and documentaries on Darkest Hour at least once a month. If you guys like that sort of thing and you like my voice, why not try and check them out? Maybe that content will be for you. Overall though guys, I think that's pretty much it for now, so thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.